The sound was a hollow, sickening thwack, the impact of a high-velocity slug tearing through empty air, precisely 10 inches from the target's coveted center mass. It wasn't just a miss, it was the echoing sound of a family's hope shattering. The digital display above the scorching range bay immediately flashed the 3 most humiliating letters in Specialist Leo Torres's young life: miss. His heart plummeted into his stomach, a cold, heavy stone dragging him down into the dust of the military range. He flinched, instinctively, even after the shot, and the raw shame of that micro-movement was worse than the failure itself. He gripped the composite polymer stock of the M20 rifle, a $15,000 instrument of pinpoint accuracy, so hard his knuckles were not just white, they were translucent, strained islands in a sea of sweat and dread. He was choking the weapon, fighting it, trying to muscle the bullet to the target, and the M20, an unforgiving mistress, retaliated with catastrophic imprecision. Torres was 19, and every centimeter of the 600-meter range was a battlefield where his future was losing. Back home, the family farm, the one his grandfather built brick by brick after the war, was one bad harvest away from foreclosure. His only ticket out, his only prayer of saving them, was the full scholarship tied to the upcoming Aurora Cup, the international marksmanship competition that represented the pinnacle of tactical precision. If he couldn't maintain a sub-1 minute of angle, MOA, grouping by Friday, Sergeant First Class Knox, the tyrannical guardian of the team roster, would cut him, replace him with a drone, or maybe just leave the slot empty in arrogant protest. The weight wasn't the rifle, it was the 3 generations of back-breaking labor sitting squarely on his teenage shoulders, and right now, the weight was crushing him into the sun-baked sand. Again, Torres. And this time, try to hit the country. Sergeant First Class Knox's voice was a low, vibrating growl, a razor-edge scraping against glass that promised a lifetime of psychological misery. Knox stood directly behind the firing line, his polished boots crunching on the spent casings, his silhouette framed by the harsh, relentless desert sun. Knox was a walking, breathing monument to toxic perfection, young, physically flawless, with a personal shooting record that was untouchable and a complete, absolute inability to tolerate human frailty. He viewed Torres's nervous habit, the fractional muscle spasm right before the trigger broke, the flinch, as a moral failing, a sign of weakness that deserved nothing less than professional annihilation. He didn't just want Torres to succeed, he wanted Torres to suffer for his lack of immediate perfection. Torres raised the rifle, fighting the tremor that started in his core and ran through his arms. Breathe. Control. It's just physics. He adjusted the parallax on the scope, the fine crosshairs swimming over the distant target. The cross breeze, a deceptive, subtle wind known locally as the serpent's whisper, was clocking in at 7.2 miles per hour, demanding an intricate, intuitive hold-off adjustment that was currently beyond his panicked mind. He tried to remember the fundamentals, the 4 pillars of marksmanship, but the sergeant's impatient, deliberate sigh, loud enough to cut through the high-grade ear protection, was a psychological weapon. It ripped the concentration from his mind, turning the 4 pillars to dust. Crack! The second shot was a disaster. Wide right. Not just a miss, but a catastrophic failure of intuition and physics. It proved he wasn't just technically struggling, he was internally collapsing. Knox didn't yell. That would have been mercy. He performed a slow, deliberate professional execution. He walked up to the line, his movement a slow-motion ballet of contempt, and snatched the rifle from the sandbag rest as if it were contaminated. He held the rifle high, shaking it slightly. You're flinching before the trigger breaks. You're scared of the recoil. You're scared of failing. That fear, that weakness, is unacceptable here, Specialist. Get off the line. You're an embarrassment. We gave you the M20, a rifle built to hit the head of a pin at this distance, and you're shooting like you're aiming for the moon. Your weakness is a tactical vulnerability we cannot afford. What is wrong with you? Torres didn't answer. He couldn't. He stared down at the baked earth, the acid of humiliation burning in his throat. His entire identity, the future of his family, his last sliver of hope, was dissolving into the relentless dust of the range. He knew, with devastating certainty, that he was done. His time was up, and Knox was already looking over the roster, his eyes calculating who would be the next victim of his toxic pursuit of perfection. The only thing standing between Torres and a devastating defeat was about to walk into his life. 50 yards away, on a bench under a flimsy, sun-bleached canopy, sat an old man. His presence was an immediate security anomaly on the highly restricted, high-risk weapons range. He wore a crisp, impeccably ironed denim shirt, the sleeves rolled precisely to the elbow, revealing forearms corded with muscle that seemed to belong to a much younger man. His boots, though worn and scuffed, were spotless, laced with military precision. His skin was the color of rich, dark mahogany, and his hands, folded neatly on his lap, were massive, lined with scars, telling silent, complex stories of a lifetime spent mastering unforgiving materials. He had been there for over 90 minutes, completely still, sipping slowly from a thermos of coffee, his startlingly light gray eyes fixed not on the digital display, but on the flow of the air and the subtle muscle movements of the shooters. His compensating for a high shoulder, which forces the pull, the old man mumbled, mainly to the rising heat haze distorting the targets. The shoulder needs to drop a half-inch to align the spine with the axis of recoil. Right now, that rifle isn't an extension of his body, it's a foreign object he's violently fighting, and the physics are punishing him for it. Knox, who had just finished firing an aggressive, almost theatrical 3-shot group, tight, impressive, but slightly off-center, heard the low, technical critique. He spun, his face tight with immediate, professional, and territorial fury. His own grouping was evidence of his talent, yet the old man's words pierced his ego like a stray round. Hey, you! This is a live-fire zone. Unauthorized civilians are prohibited. Move out, old man, or I'll have the guards escort you off the base now, Knox barked, the volume of his voice designed to intimidate and humiliate. The man looked up, his pale eyes that seemed to have witnessed decades of history, absorbing the harsh sun without blinking. He took another, deliberate sip of coffee, the gesture unhurried, a profound act of stillness in the chaos. I know the regulations, son. Helped draft a few of the early manuals for this precision range, matter of fact. And I'm not moving. You're wasting that young man's time and talent by treating fear like a disciplinary problem. Fear is a signal. You should be teaching him how to read it, not how to suppress it. Knox stalked over, his combat boots throwing up plumes of dust. He leaned over the bench, using his formidable physique as a weapon. Listen, Pop. We're talking about sub-MOA precision here, the pinnacle of the technical skill required for the Aurora Cup. This isn't a hunting rifle. We're running advanced ballistics. We don't need advice from the bleachers. I'm an expert, trained on billion-dollar technology. You watch a documentary and think you know the manual. I'm the authority here. The old man put down his thermos. He gestured with a large, scarred hand toward Knox's target grouping, which was still displayed on the monitor, a tight knot, but marginally left of center. You shot it like you had something to prove to the boy, Sergeant, not like you had a job to do for the target. You're pulling left because you're rushing the exhale, trying to break the shot before your heart rate settles from the exertion of the run-up. You're fighting the rifle's natural harmonic. The rifle doesn't care about your rank, only your stillness. You are imposing your ego on the physics, and the physics are winning. Knox's jaw went slack. The technical diagnosis was devastatingly precise, hitting exactly the minor, yet persistent, flaw his mentors had tried to drill out of him for years. But his arrogance was a carefully constructed fortress. He wasn't about to let it crumble. He checked his radio. Security, I have a civilian intruder at range point Alpha. Request immediate escort. Tall, elderly, making unsupported technical claims. The old man chuckled, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated in his chest. Don't bother, son. The head of security is my godson. He just radioed me to check on the conditions here. But fine, I'll take a few steps. But not until I make a point. Now, unless you're going to pick up that rifle and show my specialist how to truly respect the system, you need to back up. Your posture is disrupting the atmospheric flow around the firing line. The old man stood up, slowly, deliberately, but with a foundational stability that belied his age. He walked straight past a sputtering, radio-calling Knox and stopped directly behind a shell-shocked Torres. May I, Private? He asked Torres, his voice low, gentle, but charged with a profound, almost electric authority. Torres looked at Knox, who was now screaming into his comms. Go ahead, specialist. Give him the rifle. Let's see the so-called expert embarrass himself. Maybe he can tell us about his time in the trenches before he throws his back out trying to cycle the bolt. Let the geriatric lesson commence. Torres handed the rifle over. As the old man's large, scarred, beautiful hands that looked like they could mend a shattered engine or carve a perfect sculpture, closed around the M20, the temperature on the range seemed to drop. He seemed to recognize the weapon, the way a master craftsman recognizes a favorite tool. He didn't cradle it or hold it aggressively. He seemed to wear it, settling it against his shoulder. He ignored the high-tech sandbags and dropped into an unconventional, deeply rooted, seated position, a posture none of the young soldiers recognized from any contemporary manual. His elbows locked against his knees, forming a human tripod so stable it felt structurally reinforced. "Young man," the old veteran said to Torres, his eyes never leaving the distant target. "You're trying to force the bullet out of the barrel. You can't force the bullet. You have to invite it. The rifle wants to be pointed straight. The trajectory is already set by the physics. You just have to stop shaking and let the truth travel." Knox hung up his comms, realizing the guards were deliberately delaying. He recovered his professional sneer. "All right, Pop. Let's see it. 600 meters. The Serpent's Whisper is clocking at 7.2. You've got to compensate for the Coriolis effect at this latitude, too. That's an 8.9-inch hold-off at minimum. Show us the magic, or get off the range." The old man drew in a single, deep, calm breath. It was the breath of a man who knew exactly how long he had to live, and was perfectly fine with the duration. He held it, then, in a move that defied logic, training, and the fundamental rules of safety, he slowly, deliberately closed his eyes. The silence was the most terrifying sound on the range. The young soldiers watching stopped breathing, their faces reflecting a mixture of awe and panic. Sergeant Knox froze mid-step, his mocking smile dissolving into a look of sheer, cold dread. He realized this wasn't bravado, this was ritual. The old man was completely blind to the target. He didn't adjust the scope, didn't account for the subtle drop, didn't even see the tiny black circle 600 meters away. He simply held an impossible, total stillness. Torres realized the microtremor in the man's hand, which had been present moments before, was now completely gone. The old veteran had become a statue of granite and bone. He was listening to the range, feeling the wind against his exposed skin, listening to the almost imperceptible hum of the bullet waiting in the chamber. "Then," he whispered, his voice soft but clear, 3.759, mark. Crack! The shot was instantaneous, sharp, and brutally final. It ripped through the silence, leaving behind an echoing void. The digital display, after a gut-wrenching, agonizing 3-second delay, which felt like an hour to Torres, flashed not a number, but a single, profound word, bullseye. Knox's knees buckled slightly. A perfect centermass shot. The kind of shot that wins wars and establishes legends. And he did it blind. "The rifle," the old man said, his eyes still closed, his voice perfectly steady, not even winded, "doesn't shoot what you see. It shoots what you feel. The wind is a current. The distance is a tempo. The shot is a single, isolated note in the chaos. The fear of missing is what moves your hand. Don't look with your eyes, look with your soul, and trust the physics." He opened his eyes. They were bright, piercing, fully alive. He stood up, slowly, deliberately. He handed the rifle back to Torres. "Feel the balance point, son. It's right there, precisely where the barrel meets the gas port. You hold it there, and the rifle is weightless. It's an extension of your intent, not a burden of expectation." Knox walked toward the man, his arrogance completely shattered, replaced by an expression of pure, terrified professional shock. He looked at the impossible hole on the monitor, then back at the man's scarred hands. He felt a profound sense of history washing over him, a dark, legendary wave. The zero-tolerance adjustment," Knox stammered, his voice hoarse, thin. "Closing your eyes for the windshift calculation. That technique, it was banned in the late 1980s. Too precise. Too dangerous. It was an unofficial maneuver for the deepest cover operations. Only one man in the history of the Corps ever mastered it to this degree. We called him the Ghost." The old man smiled, a shy, weary crinkle around his eyes. "They called me a lot of things. Mostly, they called me Sergeant Major." Knox's head snapped up. His eyes widened as the realization hit him like a physical blow, the specific cut of the collar, the faint, geometric scar just above the wrist, the unwavering, pre-shot stillness. He turned sharply to his platoon, his voice now ringing with desperate reverence. "Platoon. Attention. Do you know who this is?" he roared, his volume now expressing respect, not tyranny. "This is Sergeant Major Samuel Jackson. He didn't just set the record for the highest confirmed non-spotter-assisted shot. He set it during the Black Storm mission, a shot that history declared impossible. He retired because he refused to train the next generation to rely on anything but their own intuitive physics. He is a myth made flesh. He is the ghost." Sergeant Major Jackson, the ghost, put a hand on Torres's shoulder. The touch was firm and grounding. "You have the talent, son. More than talent. You just need to quiet the noise. The noise in the air, but mostly, the noise in your head. Fear is the only thing that moves the rifle against your will." He turned to the humbled Knox. "Go easy on the boy, Sergeant. You can't drill perfection into a mind that is panicked. You guide it. You nurture it. You remind him of the purpose, the stillness you need to bring peace to the chaos, not the pressure of a scholarship or a competition. You must teach him to accept the weight of the rifle, not the weight of the world." Jackson walked toward the perimeter gate, pausing slightly. "Sergeant Major." Knox called out, his voice now soft, pleading. Will you stay? Just for the rest of the drill. We could learn in a week what takes us a decade. We need your wisdom." The old man paused at the boundary fence. He glanced back at the platoon, the young, eager, slightly terrified faces, now filled with a blinding, renewed hope. "Can't, Sergeant," he said, pulling out a battered, old flip phone. "Got to go. My great-granddaughter is picking me up. She gets mad if I'm late for her recital practice. She says the world doesn't stop for an old man's war stories." He opened the gate. "But you've got a good squad there, son. Just remember, the rifle doesn't make the soldier. The soldier makes the rifle. And the true master is the one who can achieve stillness amidst the storm." The soldiers watched him go, the legendary ghost dissolving back into the mundane world of family schedules and traffic, his denim shirt blending with the hazy horizon. Knox stood silent for a long moment, then turned to Torres, his clipboard now held loosely, respectfully. "Torres," Knox said, his voice completely calm, focused, and free of contempt for the first time. "On the line. And this time, move your left elbow a half-inch down. Feel the stillness." Torres felt the balance point, the ghost's heartbeat, exactly where the old man had shown him. He didn't close his eyes, but he felt the same profound, centered calm. He raised the rifle. He found the center. The serpent's whisper was still blowing, but it sounded less like a threat and more like a gentle suggestion. He was no longer fighting the rifle. He was partnering with it. Crack. A 10-point score. Then another. And another. The tension was gone, replaced by a quiet, rhythmic precision. They weren't just practicing marksmanship anymore. They were inheriting a legacy. They were carrying a torch passed to them by an old man in a denim shirt who showed them that the greatest power isn't in strength or youthful arrogance, but in the profound, quiet mastery that only time and perseverance can etch into the soul. We see the years on the elderly and think they are diminished. We forget that inside that weathered frame is a mind that can still teach the impossible, a mind that can still hit the target with its eyes closed. The perimeter gate clicked shut, the sound oddly mundane, sealing the legend outside and leaving the stunned platoon inside with a silence heavier than any thunder. Sergeant First Class Knox, the tyrant, the master of the perfect score, stood motionless, his face etched with a confusion that was rapidly resolving into awe and professional terror. He wasn't just humbled, he was fundamentally dismantled. The foundation of his identity, the absolute certainty of his own peak ability, had been vaporized by a single, impossible, blind shot from a man who smelled faintly of old coffee and dust. Knox realized, with chilling clarity, that he hadn't been training the best. He'd merely been policing the best, utterly ignorant of the true ceiling of human skill. Specialist Torres, however, felt a profound, exhilarating lightness. The weight was gone. The rifle, still warm in his hands, no longer felt like the crushing burden of his family's farm, but like an extension of his own possibility. He looked at the 10-point grouping he had just fired, clean, crisp, and centered, and realized the transformation wasn't physical, it was an internal realignment. The old man hadn't adjusted the scope, he had adjusted Torres's soul. The fear, the paralyzing dread that had caused the involuntary muscular jerk before the trigger break, the dreaded flinch, had been replaced by a quiet, deep focus. The voice in his head, which used to scream "Don't fail," now simply whispered, "Be still." It was the difference between fighting gravity and moving with the current. Knox finally moved. He walked slowly, almost reverently, to the firing line and picked up the discarded M20 precision rifle Torres had just used. He didn't inspect the barrel or the bolt. He inspected the stock, running his thumb over the faint impression left by Jackson's hand. He then looked at the target display, staring at the pristine, singular hole that represented the ghost's shot. 600 meters, Knox muttered, his voice barely audible. Wind at 7.2. Coriolis effect. The M20's barrel harmonics at that specific temperature. To compensate for all of that without visual input, in one continuous moment of intuitive physics, it's a level of processing that shouldn't exist. It defies the manuals I teach. He felt a dizzying mix of despair and elation. Despair that he was so far from true mastery, elation that true mastery actually existed. The rest of the platoon, held rigid at attention by the sheer force of the moment, began to relax. Corporal Reyes, the platoon's second-best shooter, walked up to Knox, his face pale. "Sergeant, I saw him breathe. Just one breath. And then he closed his eyes. Is that real, Sergeant? Did he calculate the wind just by feeling it on his skin? Like a whisper?" Knox didn't answer immediately. He leveled a deep, searching gaze at Reyes. He didn't calculate, Reyes. Calculation is hesitation. He knew. He allowed the rifle to become an honest broker of the truth. We rely on machines and math. He relies on a connection that precedes both. Knox then did something none of them had ever witnessed. He put down the rifle, stood at attention, and looked directly at Torres. "Specialist Torres, report on the fundamental change you experienced." Immediately. Torres took a steadying breath, the new, calibrated breath Jackson had taught him. "Staff Sergeant, I was fighting the rifle. I was trying to impose my will to hit the target because of the pressure. Sergeant Major Jackson told me I couldn't force the bullet. He moved my hand up half an inch to the balance point, the heartbeat. When I held it there, the weight shifted. It became neutral. And when I closed my eyes, I stopped seeing the target and started feeling the stillness I needed to achieve before breaking the shot. I wasn't aiming for the center. I was aiming for the moment of absolute, perfect zero movement. The target became irrelevant. Only the truth of the action mattered." Knox nodded slowly, his mind racing. He was already running the data, trying to retrofit the ancient wisdom into the modern lexicon. The stillness, he wasn't accounting for the wind. He was waiting for the wind to cancel itself out, or incorporating the exact microshift into his muscle memory milliseconds before the firing pin struck. It's a temporal shot. It's shooting the future. Knox turned to the platoon, his voice now ringing with new, terrifying authority, but stripped of its former toxicity. "We are done with the manual for today. We are done with the digital readings. Today, we learn stillness. Torres, get back on the line. Use your natural posture. Drop that shoulder. Let's see if the spirit of the ghost is contagious." Torres returned to the line, firing group after group, each one a tight, perfect circle. He was no longer trying to avoid failure. He was embodying success. But the focus of the platoon remained on Knox. The sergeant was pacing, his usual tight, aggressive gait replaced by a restless energy. He was fighting an internal battle, and the platoon could sense it. Knox finally stopped, leaning heavily against the railing. He looked out over the sun-drenched range, his eyes fixed on the distant hill line where Jackson had vanished. He spoke, not to the platoon, but to the memory of the old man, his voice raw and thick with a sudden, devastating vulnerability that shattered his armor. "I hated seeing you fail, Torres. I truly did. But I hated weakness more. I built my entire career on the principle of zero tolerance because I failed once. I failed catastrophically." He paused, the words costing him tremendous effort. 5 years ago. Pre-deployment assessment. I was the top shot in the entire theater. Arrogant, just like I am now. The only target I couldn't hit was the one that mattered, the emotional one. My father, he died 2 days before my final certification. He didn't want me in the service. He wanted me to take over his small carpentry shop. I dismissed him, told him the quiet life was for lesser men. I went to the range, thinking I could shoot the grief out of my body. I shot a perfect score, but I didn't feel anything. I was a machine. And when I went home, I realized I had traded my humanity for a perfect score. The platoon was silent, stunned by the confession. Knox, the unfeeling machine, was showing them the wound that drove his cruelty. "I came back here," And every time I saw a flinch, every time I saw hesitation, like I saw in you, Torres, I didn't see weakness. I saw the ghost of my own moral failure. I saw the man who thought he was too good for a life of quiet dignity. I pushed you because I was pushing myself. I broke you because I felt broken. I apologize, specialist. The fear you were carrying for your family? That's not weakness. That's the strength of purpose. I had no purpose but ego. Knox turned fully to the platoon, his rigid posture finally easing. The ghost taught me today. He taught me that the silence in the moment of the shot is the space where the truth lives. I've been filling that space with anger. We will change our entire methodology, starting now. We will train the soul before we train the finger. That is the new legacy of this platoon. This raw moment was the turning point. The sergeant was no longer the antagonist. He was a flawed mentor, saved by the very legend he tried to dismiss. The tension shifted from internal conflict, Knox versus Torres, to external anticipation. What else is the ghost hiding? The internal transformation was abruptly halted by a sharp, blaring alarm that cut across the range. A black armored vehicle, bearing the insignia of Base Command Security, tore across the access road and screeched to a halt at the perimeter gate. A stern-faced major in crisp fatigues burst out, flanked by 2 armed guards. Sergeant First Class Knox. This is a restricted zone. We have reports of a civilian breach and unauthorized use of a precision asset. The major barked into the hot air. Where is the subject? The one who calls himself Jackson. Knox snapped to attention, his reformed self-aware. Major, with all due respect, the subject is Sergeant Major Samuel Jackson, a retired decorated operative. He was merely offering guidance. Guidance, the major spat, his eyes widening with alarm. Sergeant, do you have any idea who you let handle that rifle? That man is on a highly classified, deep-level protective custody list. He didn't just master that eyes-closed technique, he invented it. He was known as the original Sentinel. He walked away from the service 30 years ago because he refused to train an assassination unit using his technique. He deemed it too powerful, too dangerous for any purpose outside absolute self-defense. We have been tracking him loosely for weeks, worried he was returning to the field. Why is he here? The revelation hit the platoon with the force of a sonic boom. The ghost was more than a sniper. He was a master who chose self-imposed exile rather than compromise his moral code. The stillness wasn't just skill. It was a deep, 30-year commitment to ethical responsibility. He was the sentinel, the self-appointed protector of the technique. Knox, finally realizing the full, terrifying weight of the situation, felt a chill run down his spine. He came here because Specialist Torres was struggling, Major. He came because he heard the weakness, the lack of stillness, and he felt a moral obligation to correct it. He came to pass on the core principle. The power of the shot must be balanced by the purity of the heart. He risked revealing himself to save one young soldier's soul. The major stared, speechless. He looked at Torres, the young man whose simple failure had triggered a legend's return. He looked at the flawless shot on the display. Did he make any demands? Did he take anything? Knox shook his head. He took nothing, Major. He only left a lesson. He told me his granddaughter was waiting for him. He left because he didn't want to be late for her recital practice. The major lowered his weapon, the tension draining out of his posture, replaced by profound, weary respect. Then he is truly the ghost. He always prioritized the small, human moments over the biggest conflicts. Release the area, Sergeant. Let the legend go. But never, ever forget what you saw here. You have been touched by the true spirit of the Corps. The security team left, their engines fading into the distant heat haze. The silence that returned was different now. It was a silence of profound understanding, not fear. Knox walked over to Torres, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder, a gesture that was now genuinely paternal, devoid of his old, toxic authority. Specialist Torres, Knox said, his voice quiet. Your farm. The scholarship. Forget them. They are external pressure. They are noise. From this moment on, your only goal is stillness. You will master the principle Jackson taught you. I will personally supervise your training. We will break down his technique, not to replicate the shot, but to replicate the state of mind required to make the shot. We will call this the Sentinel's discipline. Over the next few weeks, the practice pad transformed. Knox didn't yell, he whispered. He didn't demand speed, he demanded patience. He introduced exercises designed not for muscle strength, but for inner tranquility. They practiced shooting blindfolded at close range to force reliance on natural alignment and breath control. They spent hours simply sitting on the line, feeling the wind currents, learning to read the serpent's whisper not as a problem to be solved with math, but as a rhythm to be understood with skin and bone. Torres thrived. The weight was gone, and his scores soared. He wasn't just hitting the center, he was creating groupings so tight they looked like a single, elongated whole. Knox, meanwhile, found his own peace. He often sat with Torres, sharing stories, not of war or heroism, but of his father's carpentry shop, of the quiet, deliberate patience required to plane a piece of wood until it was perfectly smooth. He realized Jackson's lesson extended far beyond the rifle. Perfection wasn't about imposing your will on the world. It was about removing your ego and allowing the natural truth of the object, the wood, the metal, the bullet, to achieve its intended destiny. Knox himself, now calmer, less rushed, watched his scores stabilize and improve, surpassing even his old records, because he had stopped fighting his own heart. The day of the Aurora Cup arrived. Torres was a different person, calm, focused, centered. He didn't look at the crowd, the dignitaries, or the flashing cameras. He looked only at the rifle, at the small, perfect balance point where Jackson's scarred hand had rested. When it was his turn, he settled into his natural position, took the sentinel's breath, and waited. He waited for the noise to subside, for the serpent's whisper to reach a predictable frequency, for his heartbeat to settle into a near-silent rhythm. He didn't close his eyes, but he felt the target, 600 meters away, with a clarity that transcended sight. Crack! 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 He fired his mandatory 3 rounds. His grouping was perfect. Not just sub-MOA, it was the tightest grouping of the entire competition. He didn't just win the scholarship, he set a new competition record for precision under pressure. Weeks later, Knox and Torres, both humbled and transformed, drove 40 miles to a small town outside the base. They were in uniform, but not on duty. They had found the address for the community center where Sergeant Major Jackson's great-granddaughter, a girl named Maya, was having her recital. They sat in the back row, blending into the crowd of parents and grandparents. The air was filled with the sweet, slightly chaotic sound of children's violins. Suddenly, a little girl with bright ribbons in her hair and a concentration face that mirrored the stillness of a marksman, walked onto the stage. Maya. Sergeant Major Jackson was there, sitting in the front row, his denim shirt freshly pressed. He no longer looked like the ghost. He looked simply like a proud grandfather, leaning slightly on his cane, his eyes fixed on the small figure on the stage. Maya started to play. It wasn't perfect. There were squeaks and slips, the natural imperfections of learning. But she played with a profound, focused concentration. Knox leaned over to Torres. "She's not fighting the violin, Torres," Knox whispered, his eyes shining with understanding. "She's letting the sound come out. She's embracing the truth of the moment. That is the Sentinel's discipline." When Maya finished, the small crowd erupted in applause. Jackson rose slowly, his tremor returning, and applauded his great-granddaughter with a fierce, radiant pride. As he turned to leave, he spotted Knox and Torres in the back row. He didn't look surprised. He just offered a small, knowing nod. Knox and Torres walked quickly to meet him by the door. "Sergeant Major," Knox said, offering a crisp, heartfelt salute. "Thank you. You saved my soul, sir. And you saved the career of my best man." Jackson smiled, his crinkly, gentle smile. "The rifle is just a piece of metal, Sergeant. The violin is just a piece of wood. They only require 2 things, respect for the balance, and absolute stillness from the one holding them. You just needed a reminder that the most important target is the one you aim for in your own heart." He walked out, leaning on his cane, the Iron Sentinel disappearing once more into the quiet, beautiful rhythm of civilian life. Knox and Torres watched him go, 2 men fundamentally altered, ready to carry forward a legacy that had nothing to do with war and everything to do with quiet, ethical mastery. The moral of the story isn't about skill. It's about what you choose to do with power. Sergeant Major Jackson, the ghost, the original Sentinel, could have been a military legend. Instead, he chose to be a grandfather, a mentor, and a simple teacher of truth. He showed us that the greatest purpose of a powerful skill is not to dominate, but to liberate, to free the next generation from the tyranny of their own fear. If this story of true mastery and silent purpose spoke to your soul, hit that like button, subscribe for more profound transformations, and share this with anyone who needs to know that the legends don't retire, They simply redefine their mission. Keep your head high, your grip steady, and your heart still.